Welcome to the NFT Finance Podcast, sponsored by Goblin Sachs. My name is Terry, and I'm joined by my co-host Helmus. And today we welcome Laureus, Hentai Avenger, and Tropical Punter from INSRT Finance, an EVM-compatible protocol for accessing NFTfi returns.
Awesome. Thanks, Terry. And welcome, guys. Glad to have you on the podcast. Let's kick it off with just a round of intros. I guess how did you get into crypto, NFTs, and let's start with Tropical Punter.
Yeah, thanks for having us, guys. Happy to be on. So, my name's Punter, or my government name is Daniel. I've been in the space since 2017. Kind of fell in love with Ethereum and smart contracts. The decentralization of financial infrastructure immediately appealed to me. I come from a financial and software engineering background, worked as an engineer at a fintech and then a hedge fund. But what really kept me in the space since 2017 is just honestly the market inefficiencies, how amazing the environment was for trading. And then what really hooked me was, I'd say, in summer of 2021, NFTs really popped up on my radar again from a perspective of trading at first. But what really sort of enthralled me was that NFTs really clicked for me as something that is actually applicable to the real world, where I felt the initial ERC fractional token representations missed the mark a little bit in terms of becoming applicable for real world applications.
And then maybe Hentai Avenger, do you want to give a quick intro on yourself?
Yeah, sure, man. So my name's Hentai Avenger. You can call me Steven, or some people online like to call me Bob. For some background, I grew up in a very traditional finance family. Grew up trading equities. Previously, I was trading biotech and pharma back in 2016 until late 2019. And I was always 1 foot in, 1 foot out on crypto. But what really hooked me was ETH DeFi season. That was July, August of 2020. And then, I think one of the reasons why I'm still around here is because of my social media. I think I grew a pretty big audience because I think a lot of people could relate to me. And I was one of the really weird, vanilla success stories, I think, on Twitter at the time. So, love the space. Today was absolutely crazy, but I think that's why we're all here, because we all felt like crazy.
Should I go next?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, hey, my name's Laureus. In a past life, I actually was a derivatives lawyer, derivatives and DCM. I've been doing a little bit of trading since 2017. Got really interested in on-chain finance or blockchain, distributed ledger technology, mid 2019. When I was doing my post-grad, we were basically trying to figure out a way how we can bring the securitization stack on chain, a problem that really hasn't been solved until now. It still hasn't been solved. And that kind of blossomed into, just mostly trying to help people figure out a few things on the structuring and regulatory side for institutional capital deployment. Mostly on the tech side, I have experience with B2B SaaS and a few vanilla tech things, but kind of understood that I want to build something. So I have a couple of friends who are founders of protocols and kind of thought about that. Hey, there's a lot of cool things happening in the space. I fell in love with a lot of set and forget products that were coming out at that time. It was early 2021, specifically Ribbon Finance and DeFi options wallets. We kind of got together, started building a DeFi options wallet, but the market became saturated extremely fast. And, I've always had this fascination of surrounding debt capital markets, securitization, and structured finance in general. And while I don't necessarily come from a pure NFT, a JPEG background, the whole idea of non-fungible digital assets and how a lot of assets potentially can be represented on chain seems like it's extremely enthralling. And I really believe that non-fungible assets or NFTs, over time, we're going to see a significant shift in how property rights, not just intellectual property rights, will be managed, transferred, and financialized. And, I met Daniel, I met Hentai, And things we've been working on INSRT Finance ever since, trying to solve some of those problems when it comes to the accessibility of non-fungible digital assets.
Cool. I think it's a perfect segue into maybe a high-level overview of what INSRT Finance does. And it sounds like you just started touching on the pain point, but if you want to expand there, that'd be great.
Sure. So the idea behind INSRT is that we want to build a decentralized intermediary for non-fungible digital assets, initially starting with PFPs. So we want to build like a one-stop aggregation solution for NFTfi or metaverse capital markets, which is a narrative that's been popping relatively recently. So the idea behind INSRT is that our users will be able to deposit into specific center forget strategies, which we call vaults. And the vaults manage P&L and risk management end to end. But the vaults are just one aspect of the protocol. The idea is that there will be a wide range of offerings on our DApp, on our protocol that will serve retail users, DAO treasuries, and hopefully later down the line, we hope that we'll be able to serve institutional capital as well. So we kind of think of it as the centralized broker dealer. And the idea is that we build a liquidity superhighway. We do two things. We make it easy for people to access NFT Finance. And secondly, we want to help the underlying primitives that we integrate with user liquidity acquisition so that they can focus on building amazing infrastructure, mechanisms, and primitives.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And could you give us a quick Alice and Bob example of how, say, for example, a strategy creator or a vault deployer, and then perhaps a liquidity provider, and also perhaps a user who wants to take advantage of these strategies, and how their user flow will look like?
Mm-hmm. I can start. Let's start off with Alice, and I'm going to assume Alice is a depositor. So Alice would head over to our DApp. In an ideal end state, there would be a lot of offerings based on, Alice's specific risk return profile, which she could easily select. We're really like over-indexing on UI, UX, cleanliness, and quality. Alice would select, an appropriate vault. For example, some vaults would accept non-NFT deposits. Some vaults would allow for direct NFT deposits, and a vault would it's basically a structured product, right? You put in that asset, and it makes it work for you. And those vaults, so Alice wouldn't see the complexity, put in those assets, and they would generate returns over time. Each vault uses effectively 1 to 3 primitives, NFTfi infrastructure, in order to generate that yield. And what we want to do over time is, so obviously we want to build out the initial vaults ourselves, but we want to get to a state where people are building on top of our protocol, right? So that's where Bob comes in. So Bob is, for whatever reason, also enthralled by non-fungible digital assets. He loves JPEGs, which is really important at the very start. And hopefully Bob is also a quantitative researcher. So what our core team will do is that we will integrate across the stack in terms of our base layer, allowing Bob to come in, look at the primitives that are accessible. Bob can do some research, send a proposal to the DAO. And if the DAO approves that proposal for a particular vault, the integrations are basically already there. Additionally, we can help Bob out if anything, needs to be added. And the idea is that Bob will be rewarded by revenue sharing and additional token mechanism incentives. So Alice would invest, Bob would come in and do quantitative research and offer Alice a vault.
Gotcha. That's actually quite a clear explanation. And I understand in the process of helping Bob deploy different vault strategies, you guys are creating wrappers and sort of out-of-the-box strategies that people can easily integrate. Could you guys explain more so what that entails?
Sure. So I can start off with it. And Daniel, if you want to come in, feel free to come in. So the idea behind wrappers is that we wrap around primitives, right? So a wrapper allows us to utilize the smart contracts for a particular primitive in order for us to deploy those assets through a particular strategy chain. Like as an arbitrary example, what you can do is you can use a collateralization primitive. We know that there are a lot of them there with different types of microstructure design. We can use that collateralization primitive to lever up against the JPEG. And further down the chain, we can use a combination of primitives to execute a specific, basically to generate a specific exposure, right? It potentially might be yield farming. It might be something delta neutral. It might be something even more exotic, we have a couple of ideas for that. But the idea is that we want to cover exposures throughout the entire stack. So collateralization-based strategies, derivatives-based strategies that introduce elements of fractionalization. For example, our go-to-market product. Daniel, maybe you have anything to add on top of what I said.
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. So I think you covered it pretty well, Loris. Wrappers are, functionally they're the integrations and one of the core technologies that we're building that allow our users to gain exposure to NFT financial protocols as well as DeFi protocols, whichever ones have solid utility and promise. They function as a simplified interface that allows people to eventually assemble their own strategies and gain exposure to what are complex financial infrastructure without, all the headache that goes along with that. And they're the essential building block that we're using for our own vaults to begin with. The vaults are strategies that use those aforementioned wrappers to provide users with different returns based on sort of risk exposure that they would like to have. And down the line, these wrappers are going to be building blocks that we offer to DAOs, researchers, strategists that want to assemble their own strategies using the wrappers.
And I think to cap that off, how we internally, in terms of our strategy, frame the protocols that we see it basically in three pillars, right? You have these vaults, which are the actual center for strategies that our users use. So Alice would use it. Then we call it, there's the DAO. Sometimes we call it user creative strategies or user driven strategies or strategy discovery, where Bob comes in, right? He can send a proposal. Over time, we will try and make it even more seamless in terms of UI and UX to introduce that asset management aspect. But the third pillar is, so if our job is to have a great base layer, I think what's really important is to think also about infrastructural on-ramps and off-ramps, right? I don't necessarily want to go into specific details here, but like some of the issues that we're facing in NFT finance relate to the fact that a lot of new wallet interactions happen with, for example, centralized NFT marketplaces. But a lot of those users who potentially have blue chip assets or assets that could be appraised are not necessarily interacting with NFTfi primitives. And that is one of the problems that we later down the line want to solve and create more or less, let's say, a user acquisition funnel that'll be tremendously beneficial for our primitive partners.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess as a go-to-market for these generalizable strategies, you guys are starting off with one vault, is my understanding. It'd be great for us to learn more about how that operates and what are the strategies that underlie this one.
Daniel, you want to hop in?
Yeah, I'd love to discuss our first vault. So we're calling it the Shard Vault. And I would say it's more a category of vaults that we'll be going to market with. The first Shard Vault features a CryptoPunk and is built around it. So what is a shard vault? It blends a few NFT and DeFi concepts, particularly fractionalization, collateralization, and yield farming. So how it functions is a user can deposit within a shard vault. For the first vault, we'll be supporting ETH deposits. In exchange for their deposit, they are given a shard NFT. This NFT represents their participation within the vault and also functions as a receipt or proof of ownership of the vault's assets. So for the first shard vault, we've already acquired CryptoPunk 9620. So anyone that participates within the shard vault has a proportional stake or ownership of Punk 9620. What we do with the Punk is actually deposit it into an NFT lending protocol. We're partnering and launching with JPEG for the first vault. And so once the Punk is in JPEG's protocol, we take out a borrowed asset. In this case, it'll be PETH, which is their synthetic ETH product. And we use that ETH to farm. And as we yield farm, we're able to pay off the borrow rate and essentially pay out all additional yield to the shard NFT holders. So for depositors, it can feel like a more intuitive or native experience of what they're used to when interacting with NFTs. And on top of that, they get paid to own the NFT that they are given.
Plus, another thing that I would like to add is that the fractions, each of the fractions actually has unique art.
Oh, that's really cool.
So you can trade it on secondary. You can play around with instant liquidity markets if you want to. The idea, our perspective is perhaps slightly different than what other great teams are building in the space. We kind of see it as our initial mission to try and onboard more like JPEG holders into NFT finance, into metaverse capital markets, right? Because we believe those are the true super early adopters. So in that sense, we're trying to get into their head and try to understand our user as much as possible. So to be fair, like once we got it started on like the journey of INSRT Finance, I think internally we had like, we gone through like 4 or 5 initial go-to-market pivots, right? A lot of the contracts for them are done, but what we realized that, the core mission at the very start for us should be onboarding more of those users. And the shard will really like represents trying to get into that user persona as much as possible, right? Making it as awesome for JPEG holders to actually interact with the world by unique artwork, by offering spot exposure, right? So not just offering like 6% yield, but actually offering that moonshot ticket, which is, one of the primary reasons, at least for at least the people who are speculating to come into the NFT space, right? Not like good yields, but those moonshot tickets. And we offer our users the ability to have that spot exposure in the shard world at a lower price point relative to what it would mean to purchase a blue chip asset.
How does risk management on these individual vaults work? Because my understanding is, so say for example, like there is a liquidation on JPEG, but the vault is closed for additional inflows of ETH. In a case like that, I imagine you guys would have had to have some sort of initial risk parameter where a certain percentage of the initial deposit is set aside for those type of situations. Is that then governed by a DAO that is responsible for each vault, or is that governed by some other entity?
So as it stands, So as it stands, we're doing the risk management in-house with, of course, the goal to transition to an on-chain solution that is controlled by DAO. And additionally, we've explored ideas around perhaps even encouraging an insurance fund that could function as a liquidation backstop. But the initial implementation is pretty straightforward. We did a historical analysis on the volatility and price conditions of CryptoPunks in particular, as that's the collection we're starting with. And we've created a liquidation risk management system that is just monitoring our loan's health at all times. And once we approach a given buffer that we've determined is slightly too risky, then we pay down the loan and relever if market conditions improve.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. I'm quite curious about what other vaults are you guys working on, or do you guys see coming online in the next couple of months?
Yeah. Go ahead, Daniel. Hop in.
Well, I was just wanting to speak, I guess, on the upcoming weeks and months. We're really going to be focusing on rolling out various permutations of this shard vault concept in the sense that as it currently stands, I feel like there's quite a bit of demand for participation within the first shard vault we're launching. And yet there's only room for 100 deposits as we sort of prototype and experiment on this design. So I'm personally very excited to offer other collections that we can generate yield for our users on, as well as give them exposure to other blue chips they might be interested in, perhaps bakes, perhaps doodles or nouns. On top of that, there's also room for shard vaults that are composites of multiple collections. I think also what's really interesting is we can completely control the levers we pull in terms of where we source borrow from, where we source the yield and farming from, to be able to create any sort of, I guess, return profile that our customers desire.
The idea is to have very modular products, and that's the philosophy. And by the way, Daniel, I think you explained it absolutely perfectly. I just wanted to add that we want to keep that modular philosophy as much as possible because we want that DAO interaction. We want that decentralized research and participation, right? In terms of future product categories, after the shard vault V1 build and the V2 build, we'll be implementing a lot more permutations. We have a couple of ideas that we want to execute when it comes to, more or less instant liquidity LP position management. Once again, I don't want to go into too many details because I don't want to overpromise. And the second thing that we want to do is, something that hasn't ever been done before. And given what has been happening the past few days, I think it's very topical and will be embraced by users. One of the core theses that we have at INSRT Finance is that we want to integrate what we call metaverse capital markets or NFT finance with the DeFi space in general, and even potentially forms of TradFi capital markets, where we currently have existing off ramps and on ramps for capital deployment. Which we have a few interesting thoughts about that, a thesis, and I feel that we will be able to feel comfortably explaining it to our community. I would have to say 2 or 3 months down the line, but we do believe it will be a bit of a game changer when it comes to sourcing yield and NFT finance.
Gotcha. How do NFT finance derivative projects like you guys, how do you guys deal with the question of scaling down in the future? Especially something like a shard vault, it requires a spot lockup, right? Yet, a collection of some decent volume is only of 10,000, and say there's only like 1,000 listed on spot, 1,000 or 500 locked in these peer-to-peer protocols. Like, how do you scale past an initial a couple dozen, 2 dozen?
Daniel, Hentai, you want to go for that, or do you want me to go for that?
Well, no, I think what you're touching on is just a core issue that is limiting NFT finance scaling, which is that if the expectation is that there's going to be a lot of depth to the instant liquidity market for an NFT collection, for example, I am a little doubtful that that's on the horizon. And I mean, I'm excited about the work that teams like SudoSwap and NFTX have done to sort of bring the traditional AMM model where you can have resting liquidity. But as you mentioned, just the fact that there's so much fewer tokens around for a particular collection, you can't even just mathematically expect there to be sufficient depth unless everyone is just idly LPing. I think where we really need to see a big push in innovation is perhaps around the pricing and appraisal, so that we can actually still do collateralization and we can get valuations on collections without needing to rely on a deep liquidity pool. So I think that there's a lot of space for teams like Abacus and other, and participants that are using ML to try to model what a collection should be priced at, or a particular NFT from a collection. There's of course trait modifiers, all of that good stuff, without necessarily just relying on a two-sided LP.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And another thing, and if I may add another thing, when it comes, for example, to the shard vault, right, and why we really like that mechanism is the fact, the assets aren't going anywhere. Theoretically, if you set it up that way, after a vault gets liquidated and the asset passes off into the secondary market again, you can simply originate it again in the vault and reuse it in order to execute like the market operations that you want to execute. So that is like kind of like a workaround when it comes to those scaling issues. But at a more macro level, we do believe that at one point in time, like the current infrastructure that's being built, it's for PFPs, but there's a lot of things that you can turn into NFTs, right? We all know the general spiel of it when it comes to like gamify, when it comes to specific utility NFTs. And the directional bet that we're making is that non-fungible digital assets will encompass a lot of these forms of property rights, and INSRT Finance will be there to be that intermediary for retail and treasury and institutional access.
Gotcha. Yeah, we were just asking because this is something that we've been thinking deeply about, right? Because we are underwriters in the space, and we found that there is a natural limitation to the number of spot assets, high blue chip spot assets with low volatility that end up being collateralized on these platforms for us to provide liquidity on. So part of our strategy has been, either you expand the number of people willing to do collateralization derivative strategies, or, you have to end up branching out to long tail assets. And that's sort of the way and the direction that we've been taking. But yeah, like great to hear how you guys are thinking about it. And I guess just to round it off, would love to better understand what's next for INSRT Finance, and how can people get involved in the space? How can people get involved with INSRT Finance?
Cool.
Yeah.
What's next is maybe, Steven, like if you want to go for it, man.
Yeah, I'll step in a little bit.
Hug the mic.
So yeah, we'll be launching the Shard Vault in the next coming weeks. Of course, the team can't give you an exact date yet because we still have some operational tasks to go through, but we're aiming for around late November to early December. I'll leak some small alpha here. but we haven't publicly announced who our collaboration for our artwork is with. And we chose to do our artwork with Degen Friend. Degen Friend did a bunch of work with like Tetranode, DeFi God, and JPEG in general. But besides that, we'll be hosting a ton of in-house cross collaborations with friends and ecosystem partners. And we'll be giving away a bunch of free money and insert NFTs to anyone that wants to participate. But in the meantime, people are gonna have to hold tight and just have fun on our socials until our first product's out.
And if anybody's listening to this, we're actively I think we have a good sense of like a lot of like the primitive partnerships that we want to go for. And, I think everybody's turning into a friend in the space. But we're always open to talking to lenders. We always want to talk to market makers who want to engage and find a way how we can, scratch each other's back. So feel free to reach out to us on our Twitter account. Just hop us a DM. Somebody from the team will get in touch with you ASAP if you want to discuss, a collab that's focused on, building this capital market.
Awesome. Thank you, Laureus, Hentai Avenger, and Tropical Punter for your time today. And listeners, go check out INSRT. Thank you for your time.
Thank you,
thanks for having us, man.
Follow me on Twitter. I'm 0xTayTayHoHo on Twitter. That's Tay with an E. And you can follow Ryan at _Helmass.
Yeah, and that's _HELMASS. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you soon.